All right, everybody, welcome back to Here for the Truth. This is side chat number 10. Today we have Pete Maglio joining us. He's a former VP of a Chicago boutique advertising specialties agency turned startup founder. A spiritual experience shattered his previously held notions of reality, awakening a great inner knowing and launching him on a journey of discovery. Over the following 7 years, he witnessed a radical evolution of his perception. This steady increase in awareness unveiled the inherent symbolism conveyed by the visual design of our letters, freeing his mind from the distortion created by phonetics and uncovering the perceived truth of the words we speak. According to Pete, learning to recognize and interpret symbols is the key to discerning truth from falsity, a skill that he believes is much needed in our modern age. I could not agree more. Pete, thanks for being here with us today, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Just quickly, this is our side chat. It's a bit more of a free flow, bit of a shorter format kind of conversation. But as succinctly as you could, like, how did you come into this kind of world?
Yeah, so I think all of us who are active on our journey per se, I think can look back at previous occurrences and realize that we've been on this the entire time. Whether it was a childhood decision that was made or whatnot, you can see like, okay, I was clearly something was in me, kind of guiding me along that path.
Breadcrumbs.
But as far as the actual activation or triggering moment per se, when I left the company that I was with to found a startup, and it was a technology startup that was meant to innovate on the space that I was in. And the space that I was in, advertising specialties is promotional products. So, every once in a while I see you hold up your mug with Here for the Truth. I'm like, yep, that's the kind of stuff that we did. The hats, yep, exactly. And so my role within the company was to create online solutions. So the whole technology arm. And eventually I hit a wall with the company I was with and said, let me do this, myself. Anyway, in doing so, I'm the type of person that wants to be the best founder and CEO I could possibly be. And so I was adamant to acquire as much knowledge and resources as I could. And I would go to all of these events. I would buy every book that was recommended. And as I was on that journey, I started to come across all of these supposed geniuses in our history, all of these polymaths, all these autodidacts, Leonardo da Vinci, Tesla, Pythagoras. And initially, I was just curious as to what did they do to increase their knowledge. But eventually, I hit a point where every one of them, without a doubt, got into what we would consider the occult, the esoteric. And initially, I brushed it off. I'm like, what is this? Maybe they just didn't know what we know now. We're smarter here in the modern age. But it kept showing up. And so I started to give it more attention. And the more I dove into it, the more unreal it became, the more curious I became. And before I knew it, I was just engrossed in all this, craziness, what we perceive as craziness to the modern person, the modern mind. And I started to research. I started to order all of these books that were, the Corpus Hermeticum, the Kabbalion, got into all of these various things that were in the realm of the occult. And my mind was shattered. I started to make all these micro changes in my life. I was a football player in college, always an athlete, felt like I needed to consume, meats and everything else to get big. But I started to make micro adjustments. I went to, plant-based diet. Initially, I was vegetarian, then went fully vegan. I started to move away from powerlifting into more, calisthenics and yoga. And I can't pinpoint one, exactly as that was the trigger, but through the ensemble of all of these various micro changes and starting a meditation practice, I had an awakening experience. Some that people would call like samadhi or, the nirvana moment where I was in a meditation. I was practicing the, not only the breath techniques, but the different chakras, focusing on the chakras and the kundalini and trying to rise that up. And before I knew it, I had this like, surge of energy go up my spine, this incredible brightness in my mind. And it was the only way I can explain it. It was like the most intense, welcoming love.
Mhm.
Like I was being hugged by spirit.
Mhm.
And I started crying and laughing. And when I came out of that, different. I was different. It was like the veil was lifted. I started to view everything with new eyes. Everything, the colors were brighter. Everything was more magical and wondrous. And people that were around me were like, "What is going on with you?" And I couldn't explain it. I
Yeah.
was just like, I don't know what to tell you. And, eventually from a startup perspective, I was so disengaged. I couldn't focus on that anymore. It didn't seem relevant. Like, what's the point of doing that? Like, and I just started to, get my hands on any spiritual book I could, any spiritual teachers I started to tune into, just accumulating again knowledge. I wanted to learn as much as I could. And eventually I just dismantled that. I left it all. And thank goodness for my wife. Before that's why I married her. Cause I'm like, if you can be with me when I went from a corporate executive to a startup founder to then a spiritual seeker, if you're in for the long haul. But during the time, thankfully she had a good enough job to support the majority of the finances. And so I wasn't burdened with any of the day to day grind. I focused all of my attention on spiritual seeking. And I think that's the reason why, some will come across and be like, your mind is just in such a different place. And I think I was able to progress so steadily because I wasn't distracted. And my mind just kept expanding and expanding. And to pinpoint, going from, that initial awakening to what I'm doing now, I really look at books like The Esoteric Structure of the Alphabet by Alvin Boyd Kuhn, um, Renee Schwaller de Lubitz, Symbol and the Symbolic, The Study of Numbers by Renee Schwaller de Lubitz, um, The Esoteric Science of Numbers, or The Secret Science of Numerology, rather, by Shirley Blackwell Lawrence. They all started to get me to look at these things differently. And it was really Renee Schwaller de Lubitz. And, he was an Egyptologist, his wife, Isha, also, and she has some phenomenal books. But they started to look at, all of these what we perceive as ancient languages were pictographic. Why? Why did they use that form to communicate? And when I started to look at that and then look at how we communicate in the modern age through phonetics, we're taught a certain symbol or a certain, design rather, associating with a letter, and that letter sounds like this. And we use this ensemble of letters to create words, sentences, communicate. In the ancient times, they just had these pictures, these pictographs, these glyphs. And what it came down to is one's dynamic and one's static. Glyphs, why they're so important is because based upon where you are from a level of consciousness standpoint, you're going to interpret different things. That's what makes a symbol a symbol. It's all encompassing and it has so much to offer based upon what angle you're perceiving it. Whereas our modern language and phonetics are static. We're taught one thing and that's it. And that's dangerous because, when we're a child and we're looking, out in nature and we go and explore, we're just taking it all in its fresh state, if you will. But then we're taught that that's that. That's a tree. That's a flower. That's a butterfly. And in doing so, what we're programming the mind to create all of these categories. And before we know it, we no longer look at things with fresh eyes. We look at things through the lens of our programming. And, that's what's taken us from this higher state of being for the collective into this lower state of materialization. And the ancients knew all about the cyclical nature of time. Time is not linear. We go through ebbs and flows of consciousness as a collective. And in the age of, full expansion and understanding of both the feminine and masculine aspects of our being, this is what the Hindus would call the Satyuga. This is the golden age. And when we condense and we become, so separated and so materialized and so lost in the illusion, this is the Iron Age, the Kali Yuga. This is modernity. And, bringing it full circle, no pun intended, to the now moment that we're experiencing, to me, we're on the cusp of the Bronze Age. The bottom of the circle, we're heading upward. We're starting to expand our consciousness, and it's initially a few of us, and then we share our thoughts, and a few others, start to look at things differently, and we start to detether or untether from that collective thought forms that become so prevalent during modernity. I was listening to your podcast with Michael Tessarian, and he dives into difference between sign and symbol and whatnot, and a lot of what he shares, I resonates. I don't have the agitation, the disdain for things that he does, that he seems to carry and express when he shares his thoughts. I think everything's purposeful, and all of the those that we encounter in our lives, that might not be looking at things like we are, we were there at one point. We had our head in the dirt, so to speak, and weren't aware of some of these things. And so it's just they just require a moment within their own experience to trigger them. And maybe it comes within this incarnation, maybe it comes in another. I don't know. But it's like freeing ourselves from judgment. And then, it's like recognizing again our own role within our creation of our own reality. We co-create the greater experience, but we also influence our direct experience. And it's based upon the programs that we've allowed to, be embedded within our mind. That's how our reality expresses. And so it's like, be very cognizant of where you're giving your attention, where you're giving your focus. I think we're all aware of that idiom of where energy goes, where attention goes, energy flows, right? It's the truth. And we see it over and over again. If you have the lens to perceive it, you can see that I was just thinking about that and then it showed up. A good example in my own, and I laugh about these things all the time because it's like pointing them out. And for me, it's an opportunity to share with, my wife or my brothers and sisters. Like, we were talking about these things, and then sure enough, it shows up in my life. And I was playing cribbage against my mother, and she nearly skunked me. And so we were talking about skunks. And then I went to watch the Celtics game with my brother, and they got smoked in game 7. And I'm like, they stunk it up. And this theme during the course of the day was all about skunks and stinking. And I come driving home that evening, and sure enough, there's a skunk going across my driveway. And I hadn't seen a skunk the entire time we've lived here. Now that's only been a year, but regardless, it was like we were talking about it and it shows up. And it's like it's just a small little thing, and people can say that's coincidence. It's not.
I want to point something out there. First of all, I totally agree with you saying, and I love everything that you're sharing, even the names that you brought up, some brilliant scholars from the past. But like I remember as a kid, man, like I'd be scrolling through the TV, and then like I'd have the thought of a movie, and I'd press the next button, and then the movie would be on. Like
Sure.
that shit would happen all the time. I'd have a dream about someone, and then I'd wake up to an email from them. And I just find all that stuff fascinating and interesting in that regard. The other thing too, I want to say in terms of what you were saying that like, oh, we were talking about something and then I saw it. Like this is where sometimes I go, is it because like it was in your consciousness that you actually saw it, as opposed to like, let's say you're driving and someone's talking about like someone tells you about a certain kind of car, like a red Plymouth. I'm just using an example. You're driving, you start seeing it everywhere. But was it maybe always there, but then just because it was in your consciousness, you observed it? This is where sometimes I'm like curious how that plays out.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, have you ever seen those pictures where you can put on different color lenses and it will show different things that were hidden to you prior?
Mm-hmm.
That's actually, this is a good segue. Truth. All right. So when I look at the word truth, the T, let me see how I can do this. So if we think of a circle, right, and you cut that circle in half horizontally, the above half is what we consider the collective mental plane, and the below half is the collective material plane, right? And so and we incarnate, that's the capital I, that's the number one. This is incarnation into the material plane. And so if you have that horizontal line within the bottom half of the incarnation, that's the capital T. That is the game. That's the experience that we're having in physicality. Now we as a human, we have dominion. What does that mean? That means that our minds are what drives this experience. And so we poke through the veil. That's the lowercase t. So that when I refer to a T, I say vessel or game, because it depends on how it's playing with the other letters. But the T is vessel or game, right? The R is reflection. The U is the collective. Then again, T, vessel or game, and the H is soul. I refer to it as, I used to refer to it as both, individual and collective, but I've now recognized that the soul is only the collective. Like it's like the soul is like this music that's being played, and we're an individual note of that music. And so looking at truth, vessel or game, reflect, collective, vessel or game, soul. To me, truth is the physical experience initially expressed without our interaction. As soon as we interact with it as an individuated node of consciousness, we create falsity. And falsity, F is frequency, A is temporal, L is consciousness. So FAL, we'll see that in a lot of words. It's frequency, temporal consciousness. This is the thoughts of your lower mind. And then S is vibration, I is incarnate, T, vessel or game, and the Y is rendering. And the Y is rendering, you see the feminine, masculine aspect come join and render. So falsity, frequency, temporal consciousness, vessel or game, incarnate, vessel or game, render. It is those interactions. When we interact with something, it is now going to express according to our own programming, and therefore creating falsities. And so there's nothing good or bad about any of these things. It's recognizing what these words are and these symbols we're communicating, because it's trying to teach us how this experience renders in our involvement in it.
Real quickly, how do you get soul from H?
Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm just trying to go back a little bit because like it's fascinating all this,
Yep.
but like how do you, like I can understand like the T and some of the other stuff, and I've heard you speak outside of this podcast some other letters that make sense in terms of their symbols, but like I'm just trying to figure out where soul comes from H.
Sure. So if you think of that, circle with a cross in it, it's also known as a sun cross. The vertical line is dimensionality, and the horizontal line is temporal. So you have that dimensionality, which we also know again with it's just a single line incarnation. And when we're talking about the loop coming down, typically it's actually showing you the bars on each side. Because if I have two bars on one side and I show one in the middle, how else can I convey the fact that we're talking about that horizontal line? You know what I'm saying? And when we rotate that, what do we have? A capital I. We've all seen a capital I with bars.
Totally.
It's again showing you the dimensionality. And when that dimensionality is now flipped onto the temporal plane, it's becoming soul. It's now expressing. Does that make sense?
I think so. I probably need to do a deeper dive, but hey,
sure.
Man, you speak about it really confidently, so I'm like, that seems to make sense.
Well, this is actually a good opportunity to give the disclaimer. I'm not one that ever claims what I do is the de facto, no pun intended, truth. I have found a way, or I should say the higher aspect of myself. Again, we're all individual fractalizations of the one self. We're all flesh of the one self. And I'll share that with you in a few minutes, which is really interesting when you look at the word flesh versus self. But we're all flesh of the one self, right? I have found through my awakening process an opportunity for my higher aspect to communicate to me and to continue to teach me. This is my method. And it's like, anyone that is in computer programming understands that there's a million different languages out there. And you can use multiple languages to write the same type of application. One, might work a little bit better than the other, or might be easier to program than the other, but the other can still do it. And so you'll have a ton of people in the truth community that, go about language, go about anything in their own way. And it's just, we have to be careful not to say like, mine is the way, I have the truth. It's just, this is my way. This is the way that I've been teaching myself through meditation, through dreams. I wake up from dreams and I'm constantly writing things down. I have an ongoing digital journal in my phone that I've now made. I made the mistake early on not to have it backed up, but it does now because I lost a whole section, which it's like, dang it. Because you never know when this inspiration, hits you. And half the time, I don't even know what I'm talking about when I write these things down. I'm like, I just came through my mind. I have to write it down. And then months later, I'll look back at it and be like, this makes sense now. Now I understand what I was trying to communicate. But it takes a while for our lower mind, for our incarnated experience, the character, to understand what the player was trying to teach us. If that makes sense.
Yeah, man, it does. So earlier you said that the moment that we interact with something that's existing that you would call truth, it then becomes falsity. But then, so how does truth come to be discovered? Because doesn't it first have to become conscious in order for it to be recognized as truth?
Yeah, so I think that's the difference between the conscious and the subconscious. The subconscious to me is it's the collective memory. And it's like having access to that full mental plane, that top half of the circle. And when you can access that, some people call it the Akashic record. The things when they inject in our memory are done through they're visually imprinted. You can think back and you can visualize sound in your mind, if you will. You can think of a melody, but it's all mental. And so sound in the way that we know sound and the way the modern vernacular for sound, through our hearing, that's a physical expression. That's the invisible being made visible, so to speak. And the subconscious, everything's imprinted in a very organized fashion in the collective memory. And this is why whenever those that have an experience often will see, very organized depictions, a lot of sacred geometry. It's a visual representation. And I think what helped me along my path, going back to the idea of glyphs versus letter or symbols versus letters, when I started to change my perspective on everything rather, I started to look at things through the design, and I started to create new designs for myself. And I think it was my attention to all of these different, designs that helped unlock some of these doors that were, previously unaccessed within my own mind. And this is the idea of, those that fire together, wire together from a synapse standpoint. And this is the merging of hemispheres as well. You think of left hemisphere associated with audio and, associated with phonetics, and the right hemisphere is visual. And so when you start to change your mind, you start to change how the reality expresses. It's like change your mind, change the matter. Everything starts to express differently. And you see that this blending of the two, the merging of the hemispheres, you start to be able to take things on from the visual standpoint, and then use the thinking, the analytical aspect of the left hemisphere to glean insights. And so both are necessary in that process, but we've become so dominant and left in this modern age.
Can you give some other examples of just like certain words that like everyone would know and how they play out? Like whether it's like media or news or like just nothing like a long word, but maybe like a short word that's in like the collective, like in the collective out
Sure.
there that we're seeing all the time. And
Yeah. So a great one, well, you just mentioned news. N is the normalizer. It's the up and down arrow. It's bringing balance. When you think of it in terms of physicality, it's you're normalizing to the game. You're normalizing to the physical experience. E is energy. And the lowercase e, if you see, again, think of that circle, the horizontal line, one shows you a tail pulling down, and then the lowercase a, the inversion, is a tail going up, but it's showing you like where it's dominating. And so lowercase e is energy, but it's usually associated with mental energy. Lowercase a is energy as well, but it's usually temporal or material energy. And so go back to the news, normalize, energy, mental energy. Wave is the ripple of energy coming into our experience. This is the new edition of our experience being implemented. And then S is vibration. It's the sine wave, as above, so below, right? It's when we know that we're experiencing the physicality when we have a heartbeat, when there's action there. It's a ripple. And so news, why news is so powerful is because it's normalized energy wave vibration. It's normalizing the consciousness of those experiencing the game. The more people that tune into the news, the more they're accepting those ideas and perceptions about our reality, therefore adopting them as their own, strengthening that expression in our reality. That's when we look at the various things, whether it's illness, tragedies, whatever it might what have you in our reality. We often hear this idea of the invisible rainbow, right? The electrification of our reality is what caused all of these negative expressions from a physical standpoint. I think there's some truth to that. I think anytime you're exposed to a new electromagnetic field, it's going to cause a destabilization in your own field. But how your body expresses is going to be dependent on how you perceive that experience, and also what programs you've allowed to imbue within your own mind. But really what was more powerful was what did that electrification enable? It enabled mass global communication. And so when you started with the radio and then visuals are more impactful than sound. And so when people could start to see things in their reality as supposedly happening and accepting them as truths, they would inadvertently call those back into their experience. And this is what's so important. So it's like you can recognize things occurring, but to give it energy and to accept it as a part of your reality is to say, I want to have that. I accept that as part of my game. And inadvertently you're calling more of those experiences, which is why there's never just one occurrence. There's usually a ripple because people keep talking about it. You see it depicted in dramas or movies. And then what happens? Another occurrence, another occurrence, another occurrence. until we stop talking about it, and then it ripples away. Does that make sense?
Yeah, man, it's definitely fascinating. I think the most important word that we need to analyze right now is Joel. What is Joel's name mean? I just need to know because then I need to use this against him for the rest of our relationship. So let's go.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, Joel, I did break down your name. J is journey, right? So if you're incarnated and then you're starting your trajectory back, that's you're starting your journey, right? O is full or complete. O is looking at the entirety. E is energy usually associated with mental energy, and L is consciousness. So the EL is energy consciousness, which is why it's always associated with angels, the Elohim. It's the energy of consciousness. Journey, full energy of consciousness. The way I've been, and again, it's definitely worth, sitting with and contemplating more. But the way I interpret that is that it is a subtle energy that gives you access to the entirety of the experience. So to me, it would lend itself to you being very aware of what's going on in your not only your own experience but the experience of others. And when you add your last name, which is really interesting, but both of you have Ra, because Ra is the projector. RA, reflect temporal. It's usually associated with the sun because the sun projects our reality into our experience, and the moon normalizes our vibrational energy to render the next experience. And so Ra, and then FI, frequency incarnate, DI, ID, you're holding, you have your driver's license, your ID, is dimension incarnate. Dimension is the perspective from in-game. And so project, frequency incarnate, dimension incarnate. To me, that would lend itself to you being probably very confident, very forthright with expressing what you feel and think. And so Joel, repeated together, says that you're probably very aware of what's going on around you, and you're not too shy about speaking it. And again, these are subtle energies. There's so much things that come into play. You guys obviously know human design, whether it's human design, gene keys, whether it's the Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, predictive index. There's so many different avenues and modalities of identifying different aspects of our being. None of them define us.
Yeah.
And the more you do the inner work, the more you tap into who you are outside of this experience, the more freedom you have, per se, to escape some of those boundaries.
Cool, man.
Dude.
That name breakdown's the clip right there. Post that everywhere. Journey of Angels. Journey of Angels, Joel.
Yeah.
But I love it, man. What do you think is the relationship between an individual and their name? Like, do you think it's chosen, like as a precursor? Like, how does that actually impact one's life? What's the importance of it?
I
some
think
people hate their name. Like, what does that?
Sure.
What kind of level of impact does that have?
Well, think about what that would do to your own experience. If you have that much tension with what you're being labeled, I mean, that kind of tension and frustration is going to be echoed in all of the things that you experience.
Yeah.
And so that person probably has a lot of trauma or perceived trauma or events within their lives that echo the tension that just their name gives them. And this is also why somebody that goes through a name change might start to express in a way that they hadn't before. They might start to emulate different behaviors. If somebody gets married and the wife takes on a new name, and you can start to see a little behavioral shift. They're just, again, they're subtle energies that you might not be fully aware of, but then once you again have the lens to perceive them, you start to recognize, like, okay, there's little nudges in a certain direction that I wasn't aware of before.
Yeah. It's so interesting, man. Well, first of all, everything we're talking about just brings up that great quote for me from Manly Hall. It's like, when the human race learns to read the language of symbolism, a great veil will fall from the eyes of men. And it's so powerful. And also, just in terms of the name thing, I'm gonna give a shout out. We're here for the truth. Not everyone knows, but I grew up with a different name. I went by my Americanized name, but my Greek given name is Gerasimos. So my parents would call me, etc. But the Americanized version of that is Jerry. So I went by Jerry for a good portion, most of my life, until I felt a deep connection to my lineage, and the person I was named after the patron saint of the island of Kefalonia, which is where my father was born and raised on in Greece, and he was known as the healer and protector of the island. So as I was getting more into like doing my healing work before I was doing my work with Joel, I just felt connected to that. I didn't feel like super connected to Jerry. So I'm even curious, like, what does Jerry represent?
Geriatric.
Is it a G or J?
Jerry.
Okay, interesting. So journey, like I told you, the initial J is referencing journey, and you'll have a lot of people that come from I should say traditional, because traditional actually means something else, but the modern scholastic approach to language will tell you that J didn't exist in half the languages, yada yada, whatever.
Yeah.
To me, again, every symbol that shows itself in our reality is purposeful. This is again, we're all individuations of the one mind, and so the one mind is trying to express in our reality, and will use us as conduits to do so. Which is why you might have an artist or a creative that creates something, and somebody that has a lens to see will see all this symbolism embedded within it. But the artist is like, I didn't mean to do that. Well, of course you didn't. If you're not aware, but you were inspired, you had that momentary connection to something outside of yourself, and then you were used as a conduit to express. Anyway, going back to the J. J is journey. E is energy, usually mental energy. The double R is an interesting one. Usually when you have letter pairings that show up over and over and over again, they're showing you a little bit of a nuance. And so the R's return. I've come to look at the double R, and I've been working on a book for quite a while, and in it I give different degrees of confidence, if you will, on certain pairings. I'm not as confident in the double R as I am some of the other things, like RA is projection. I'm super confident in that. The double R, I think, is referring to resistance. And it's very interesting when you look at resistance again from a electrical standpoint. But resistance, and again, the Y is rendering. And so journey, mental energy, resist, rendering. To me, that would lend itself to you having some resistance.
Interesting.
To your experience, to what have you. And that actually is interesting that you changed your name.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I was curious. Not everyone obviously knows that about me, especially people that have met me in the last maybe 10 years. But anyways, I'm not trying to give you like a test on our name, on every name or word, but I just thought it was curious just to see in this context.
Well, I'm constantly teaching myself. I've broken down a lot of words. I mean, if you go through my journal, there's a lot of stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that you can see the progression. And if you look at my the first journal entry, and then journal entry 100 or whatever else, and I broken down the same word, you'll see a shift in what my understanding. But I'm always breaking down things, always coming to new awareness and new insights, and that's what's so great about being on this journey, is that most people are living such a static routine life, and that's kind of by design. It lowers you into that repetitive state. Repetition locks you into a subconscious way of being. And this is the idea of connection between repetition and reptiles. People talk about the reptilians. It's just repetition. You do something over and over again, it's going to become quote unquote second nature. And you can use that to your advantage. Things that you want to do efficiently, do over, you don't even have to think about it, which is then you can focus your conscious mind on something else. Again, we've all experienced this. This idea of multitasking is a misnomer. It's microtasking. Do a little of this, a little of that. True multitasking only exists when your subconscious is doing one thing and your conscious mind is doing another. Most of us have had that experience through driving. Mm-hmm. Half the time, if we drive the same route to work or wherever we go, we'll get there and be like, I didn't even get here. Did I stop at that stoplight? Well, you're not paying conscious attention to what you're doing, because that allows you to pay attention to the podcast you're listening to. Start doing other things within your mind, having a conversation, and so it's really, really interesting. Again, nothing's inherently bad. There's so many people that are in such a fight against everything expressing our reality. They want to push blame to they or this or that, or these you can't use that because that's negative. And nothing is inherently good or bad. It's just whether or not you're anchored in a material character mode, or you've allowed yourself the recognition of the spiritual side of yourself, that which is outside of this experience. Because when you understand the two aspects of your being and then you unify them, that's when you're consciously engaged with this physical illusion, if you will. And that's where the magic happens.
So if I continue to say good morning instead of grand rising, will I have horrible days?
Well, like good, right? G is to me is spirit. It's referencing, and spirit is just the energy that renders within our reality. It's the energy that follows along the ripple of the 8. The 8 showing you that feedback loop. Above is counterclockwise and below is clockwise. Why is above counterclockwise? Because to think about, when something comes into your mind, you're reflecting on it. You're thinking back. And when you're experiencing the reality, you're going forward. And so there's that constant shift. The three shows us one of those sides. And so, the three is showing you, and that's why the double three, 33 is so evil. Three is just showing you the two halves of the eight. When you invert one of them, it's just communicating things to us, and nothing more. But going back to good, spirit, the double O is creation. It's like when you have two wholes, it is showing you, a doubling. It's showing you something that's been created. And the D is dimension. Again, lower perception. Spirit, create, dimension. Spirit is influencing the way you perceive your reality. I would say that's good. Now, what's bad? Being, temporal, dimension. When your being is so locked into that temporal perspective, the in character mode, probably perceive that as bad. And so that's all they're communicating to you. One is an awareness of something outside of yourself and allowing for that to influence you. And the other is being so locked into this illusion and not knowing anything outside of this, being a materialist, a nihilist.
Yeah, real quickly, just because we're playing like word games and stuff, like you were saying nothing's inherently good or bad, but then you were explaining the word good and saying that that's good. So then, you know what I mean? Like, like
what I think that's why we have that. Like, what I've come to know is there's a reason why certain things are perceived as beneficial and certain things are perceived as, dangerous, right? In our modern age. But it's like, get us out of this modern way of being. And then we just recognize that one's just talking about you in character. One's talking about, and driving and letting your character drive your experience. And one's saying, hey, if you just ease up the reins, allow for spirit to kind of push you into the direction you're meant to be going.
Yeah, I just think I think my only thing is I think a lot of people say, you hear it often, nothing's good or bad, nothing's good or evil, but then it's like, if you just see someone murder a baby or a kid, like I can't just be like, oh yeah, well, nothing's good or bad. This is just like, it feels a little like bypassing reality, or you know what I mean? Like, it just feels different. I mean, maybe I'm not evolved enough, but I'm just curious how language and how we play around with this, because it feels a little spiritual bypassy to me.
Yeah. Well, I hear that tossed around a lot, and I don't condone this idea of spiritual bypassing. I don't even know what that means. I know what people say it means, but to answer your question, I think it would be first important to recognize, why did that experience come into your experience? Like what have you given attention to? Where has your mind been at to see that expressed in your reality? Are you watching movies about, criminals all the time? Are you always worried about things? That's the idea of worry. Worry is going to call those things into your experience. That's the idea of being prepared. You're preparing masculine and feminine energy to render. P is perception. It's usually perception outside of the game. Reflect energy. Perceive reflected energy. Then P again, perceive, air, temporal incarnate reflection. You're preparing, or prepare, that's or ARE, temporal reflected energy. You're presupposing these things to exist in your reality. You're calling them forth. And so I think that if we all learned to recognize and start to audit our thoughts, and you allow the energy to come in and then express, allow it to vent and carry forth, but focus your attention and energy on that which you want to see perceive, or that which you want to see expressed in your reality, right? Then you won't see some of those occurrences that aren't beneficial being expressed as often. And so I'm not one to say, like, do I want those things to occur? Of course not. But I recognize the driving force behind all of this. Again, this goes back into, I don't know if you were still participating in the men's group when I said this, but when we recognize that the experience that we're having right now is yesterday's thoughts. And so it's like, that which is matter was yesterday's mind. That the thoughts become the things. And so it's like, when we start to increase our awareness, we start to see how that rendering engine operates. And therefore we can start to pre-organize our thoughts to render in a way that is according to that which we want to see, and not allowing our mind just to be carried by all of the things we're interacting with. And that goes into the idea of wars and fights. You're not going to engage in a war or a fight if you don't accept those things as truths. By doing so, what you're actually doing is saying, I believe in those things. I accept those things as an expression in my reality. And in doing so, I'm calling more of those experiences to me, which is why you always see an increase of that which people are fighting or warring against.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree to a certain extent, especially like how I've shifted, even in the last few years. Like in beginning of 2020, I was much more like combative, and I felt like I needed to convince everyone and talk more shit or whatever the case may be, and that's just not part of my mental thinking anymore. And so things have shifted even around me just because of that. So yeah, no, I get that element of it.
So to take
Joel.
your example again, so would you be prepared or willing to lay any essence of blame or guilt upon a mother whose child is randomly murdered for thinking some things, or for watching a movie?
No, because I'm not going to give my attention to somebody else's experience. I think that's where
But
we've
isn't
gone
isn't,
awry.
isn't this explanation doing that?
What are you saying that?
Like for example, if we were to ponder or contemplate around why such a horrible thing would happen, aren't we in essence through this conversation applying,
Sure,
a smidgen of that guilt upon what she could have or might have been thinking?
sure. My first tendency would be break down those words, right? Guilt and blame,
Hmm.
be lame, being, conscious temporal mental energy. To even have that thought is showing that you're still in the character. You're still a part of that, this earthly experience, and therefore you're applying that perspective to the event in the expression as you see it. Guilt, spirit, collective, incarnate
What do you mean by
consciousness.
character? Like I am in this flesh, I'm in this body, I'm having this earthly experience, right?
Yes. Yep. So
Like
yeah.
why
So Joe
why is
Rafidi,
this necessarily an illusion?
because this is just one aspect of you. There's in the way that I've come to look at our experience is that there's many touch points of myself across what we would perceive as past and future. Everything happening simultaneously. And one ripple in one incarnation is going to ripple in effect both forward and backward. When we drop a teardrop or water drop into a still pond, what happens? It ripples from center point and then outward.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look well, do I have the opportunity to share? Can I screen share?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
One sec. There you go.
All right, this is probably going to be a little much, but I just want to show you something. So this initial design, the 3, 4, 5, and 6. This is a rendering engine of our reality. This is the 9. The 9 is that drop that hits the pond, rippling outward. It begins with the separation into 3, 4, 5, 6. 3 is creation. 4 is formation. 5 is materialization, and 6 is sensation. So when we create, this is the counterclockwise above. We create, and through that creation, this first idea, we then formulate that idea. We create a blueprint. 4 is associated with that blueprint. And when that blueprint renders into our reality, it renders 4 to 5, which is why it's really interesting, 45-degree angle within the heart. You look into people that are very into geometry and different angles, the 45 comes up over and over again. I look at the qualitative aspect of numbers, much like I do letters, as opposed to the quantitative use. But I think the quantitative use has something to teach us as well, which I'll show you. Formation, materialization. This is now something expressing in our reality. And once we interact with that expression, it creates sensation. And that's 6. And then we integrate it. It goes back into the 9, and then spits out again. Now, once we've gone through this cycle once, we now know there's a 3, 4 above, and those unify into a 7. 7th heaven. This is the head. 7 is dealing with evolution. This is when you go through, like if you're practicing something, the more times you practice it, the more evolved you are going to get at doing it. You're learning. So 7's associated with like learning. We see now the 3 and the 5. That's showing you the feedback loop of the 8. We see the 5 and the 6. That's showing you mastering the physical experience in the 11. If these reduce down to a root number, it's a 2. 2 is the reflection, showing you the earthly experience. The 6 and the 4 is showing you the return of the 10. And that's the return of oneness and then the wholeness, which goes back into the 9. And so as you start to play these out, you start to see what's really interesting about this. I started to play these all out. And if you look at, let me show you the grid. They all end up in the corners. And there's other numbers that are hidden from us. And so to me, it's like these are where physical experiences are taking place at these larger and larger fractals. And what you'll also notice is that there's, I color coded this to what I perceive as associated with mental and what do I associate with the physical. And so the pink or the magenta is kind of like mental or consciousness, and the purple is that associated with the physical experience. And you'll see the L's. There's a flip flopping of the L's, and you also see a spiral. Are you seeing it?
The spiral?
Yep.
I can't really see the spiral.
So if I took that out, see this how it spirals from tighter to wider?
Yep.
Oh yeah, I do, yeah.
Let me put that back. You see the other one?
Mm-hmm.
And so one's also referred to, like I refer to like that above is time and expressed as space. Dimensionality requires space. And so it's the space and time, the interaction of space and time. And what I've come to recognize is that you think of the center point as the beginning of time. And as we ripple outward, it's what we perceive as future. And so if I were to anchor a rope at the center point and then draw that rope, pull it to the ending perimeter, each one of these, you can think of it as an incarnation. This is me experiencing these different episodes. They all exist at the same time. And as we shift, not only my individual incarnation, but we shift as a collective, we're going to shift both forward and backward. And this accounts for the Mandela. Why do things suddenly show up in our reality? Because all the Mandela is teaching us is that we're retroactively altering our perceived past. And we do so that by raising and shifting the dimension of the collective. New things from perceived ancient times are revealing themselves. Were they there? Were they not there? Were they hidden from us? Were they, are they new discoveries? It's as our reality is constantly altering retroactively to adjust to where we are as a collective. Does that make sense?
I mean, a little bit. I mean, this is stuff that I'm not very familiar with, so it's like I'm curious to see
Sure.
these images and your, how you extrapolate this all. I guess my question is like, you've been studying this for a long time. You've gotten into symbolism and just the architecture of language. Like for people that are interested in this, how do they like it's one thing for you to come on here and share and talk about your studies over the last however many years. How can like someone watching this, I guess, take more ownership and be more curious to look into this or to look into the symbology of letters more?
Yeah, I think the first step again is starting to view things differently. Again, started for me with the letters. Looking at why is the capital A shaped the way it is? Why is the B shaped the way it is? The B is an easy one to explain. It's that circle with the horizontal line, and that creates dimensions, whether it's a horizontal or vertical. And when you split those dimensions up and stack them, you're showing the capital B. And what is that communicating? It's showing you mind over matter. It's just learning to look at things a little bit differently than you were taught. And it's a gradual process. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
Like again, books like, let me grab it real quick. Renee Schwaller-Delubit's Symbol and Symbolic. It talks like the very intro talks about again the idea of hemispheres and the way your left side of your brain kind of interprets things versus your right, and learning how to see things through that right hemisphere, through the pattern recognition, through the visual. It shifts how you perceive everything within your reality. And it's and as you work on doing that and through initially engaging in a ton of different material of other people, other incarnated beings that have had these experiences, there's a lot to learn from others. You don't have to go that route. There are those that have just done the inner work and through meditation come to these same conclusions. I have disengaged from the furious research that I did once because I just don't see it as necessary anymore. I've learned that my own mind is revealing things to me. Again, through dreams, through what have you. I'm picking up things all the time. And where my focus is where a lot of these revelations happen. And then I'll shift my focus to something else. And then I'll come back. And it's just a constant, back and forth that enables the growth.
Have you gotten into Walter Russell's work?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I figured. Yeah.
Yeah. The two-way universe. Yeah, it's super interesting. Again, the way he recognizes that everything things expressed in our reality. You take water, like water is just a medium of carrying information. And, you through your own conscious energy, you can change how that water expresses. And he's found through using vibrations of sound and different, modalities of altering the chemical makeup of what is initially water or initially, a different element that we consider, and suddenly it changes into something else. How do you account for that? Other than the fact that we're in a playground, this is a sandbox, and it's all driven through our mind, through our consciousness. And it's like we have to understand that you're not playing in this playground alone. And so we constantly overlap our own perspective with the perspective of others, the people that you're closer to, the people you're more entangled with.
Mhm.
And so you might see something expressed in your reality and be like, I don't believe in that. And little do you know, your wife does, your kids do, your mom does. All these other people that you're entangled with perceive the reality in a certain way. And so if you're not consciously engaged with every single moment in your reality, you're opening up the door for other people's expectations to then express. And so it's important to recognize that. And that's why it's like, I know this, and why am I not seeing the results I want to see? Well, unless you're, out in the Himalayas alone as a yogi or a monk, completely untethered from every other node of consciousness, the likelihood of you seeing some of these, perceived magical things that you would like to see expressed is probably smaller until the rest of the collective catches up.
Hmm. One final thing, man, because you also go by Palm Wondrous. I think your podcast or something. Are those just your like initials with Wondrous after it?
Correct. Yeah.
And what was the inspiration behind that?
I
I know
mean,
you mentioned Wondrous before about your experience, so then that made me think of that.
yeah. Well, and that's just it. I found myself in the early goings of that awakening, just referring to everything in such a, as wondrous. It's just everything was so incredible, and still is. And I was just like, what can I was apprehensive of, really sharing on social networks, and especially sharing my own name, which I was like, I don't know. Again, I had to have that reflection on myself. Like, is that fear driven? Like, what is the point of that? Um, and so, but initially, yeah, it was people were knowing me by Palm Wondrous, and I mean, obviously, I shared my full name with you guys anyway.
That's it, bro. Everyone's gonna find out, man. Everybody, everyone you worked with back in the advertising exec days.
It's out.
Um,
All right,
brother,
everyone knows Jerry now too.
This
yeah,
is true.
yeah. Well, we're here for the truth, man. It's never really come up before, you know. Brother, dude, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, this is a very vast and detailed study and
Mm,
subject, and not I'd be not everyone's probably into this level of dissection when it comes to language, but you highlight just the importance of cultivating more of right brain thinking, and like how that's so important to connect to visuals, to connect to symbols, because otherwise I just feel like we've gone so left brained in our culture and our society, and we've lost that magic, that creation, that art, that just different way of thinking. And yeah, man, I mean, this is fascinating to me, whether I'm going to go down this rabbit hole, as a 5-1, talking about human design,
mhm.
investigating this, I don't know, but I'm curious. And it's so nice to just introduce you, man, and what you stand for, and share your story, because we are individual representations of whatever that thing is, and we're living our life as individuals. I mean, we are separate, even if we are connected in some greater way. And to hear your story as an individual, and to hear about your experience is really cool, man. I'm happy that we connected.
No, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Totally. Thanks for hanging out, Pete. And guys, thank you so much for listening to this side chat. We'll see you all next time. Take care. Thanks for listening, guys. All Pete's links, including his work, his podcast, and his offerings, will be in the brief just below this episode. If you're so interested in delving in further, we appreciate you listening. Peace.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time, they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean, fast forward in evolution to a place where we can share our confusions. Yeah, 450 BC, I'm sharing tea with